we need to be okay with letting go every once in a while and saying, this is the point where we need to pivot. What we're doing is not sustainable.
Yeah.
No matter how much more time, how much more resource we keep on throwing at this, it's just going to become more and more complicated in an unsustainable way. Or how can we pivot to make it more sustainable? Or, guys, we need to take a break and actually truly reevaluate, are we doing the right thing given what we know now?
Yeah. Hello, Maytal. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Joe?
Doing well. Thank you for joining us on the podcast. Really excited to have you on.
Of course, I'm happy to be here.
We got a chance to work together a couple of times, and that was a lot of fun. We learned a lot.
Yeah, that was quite the project that we had the opportunity to work on. It was really interesting, really fascinating to learn about just another side of the semiconductor industry, being more on that R&D as opposed to straight manufacturing. So definitely it was very interesting learning about it, talking to just all the sheer just different people, the perspectives that we got to hear from.
Yeah, you know what? Let's just jump right into that because it's very topical, but they work in a very peculiar space. A lot of DARPA, a lot of secret, top secret, special access programs. And that was an interesting experience for us. So we got to go through the door, some doors, but some stuff we were not allowed to look at and talk about, which was fine. So there's a couple things we should talk about with that experience. One was just the nature of it, being around DARPA projects and what that means and what that entails, and how those things legally take precedence over other projects in the food chain of what they make. And then the other thing I'd like to talk about is just the nature of how they did things a lot differently than what you would think about with most semiconductor factories and companies, bigger ones with bigger operations. So to kick us off, what was some of your highlights and interesting experiences being around kind of a DARPA supplier?
I think for me, the really interesting thing was more of you want to balance visibility. Kepner-Tregoe were very big on making thinking visible, being able to connect the dots with having that visibility. Now, when you are working with those types of projects, there is a level of confidentiality. How do you take confidential and balance that with visible? How do you still understand where the important connections are so you're able to connect those dots while still maintaining that level of confidentiality in order to be to have that level of protection that's needed?
Yeah.
So I think that's really a very interesting balance and understanding the important needs of that client that are very unique to others. Where you do have those different levels of confidentiality that then make it so you cannot have certain conversations that might be pertinent. So it's an interesting balance which made that project very unique in itself, where how can you balance visibility with confidentiality and understanding how can you still build and continue with that continuous improvement while still maintaining the confidentiality that is needed.
I agree completely. And just as you were talking about that was reminding me of what we saw. They deal with compartmentalization, right? Like at an extreme level.
Yeah, most companies already deal with silos. They're dealing it with a forced silo.
Right. So they have this compartmentalization that we saw people leverage. So sometimes they would say, I know some of this stuff, some of it's secret, some of it's top secret, it's classified in different ways, but there are some things that we can know and we're not told, and they hide behind the shield of we can't talk about it, it's classified. That may not be the case, but how do you really know? How do you fight against that? So they have this really strange built-in, I don't even know what to call it.
It's a culture where they have to err on the side of confidentiality,
Yeah.
But then it's really understanding is where can the silos be bridged and where do we still need to keep that respectful silos? So I think that's part of the culture that needed to be navigated
Yeah.
in order to continue with what they needed to do, because you still have to have those bridges in order to be successful.
Yeah.
Because understanding what parts of the conversation can be had and what cannot, which made for those very interesting dynamics. Because already companies, like I said, suffer from silos. You lose so much knowledge when we just kind of keep to ourselves.
Yeah.
So it was really critical for something that they needed to truly understand for the benefit of their own culture is where can you still have those bridges and those productive conversations and at what manners in order to then still be able to improve while still being respectful of everything that they need to be respectful of. So I think something that's interesting is then applying just different tools to help bridge those connections, have those conversations while still being flexible and confidential and breaking down the sides. So you do have just these different dichotomies that all need to be met in those very unique and interesting ways.
Yeah. And that's you're right. That's what they were fighting against. There are true blockages there that they truly could not do anything about. Something that me and you ran into 2 or 3 times at least were scientists or engineers that were working on things that their bosses were not allowed to know about. How can you give someone a performance evaluation when you don't literally are not allowed to know what they're working on?
How can you get mentorship as
That
well?
too.
Say, I'm having an issue and I need to brainstorm with you. I need to discuss with you. If you cannot go to someone directly right above you to have those conversations. So it's really, they truly did need to understand where were those boundaries. And without having those conversations as to define, this is where we can talk about, this is the parts that we can't. You end up with people in that gray zone where they either err on way too much confidentiality, so they just don't even bother having those conversations,
Right.
or on the other side, which also has its own implications. So, without having that clarity, and I think that's something that was critical and important to actually build, is getting clarity around those boundaries. So, that's really part of the dynamic that was a challenge to navigate, and especially when we're then coming in to try to see where can we make this even better. Those dynamics play out right in front of you. It wasn't
Yeah.
just people saying, I can't have these conversations with people. It's, I don't know who to have these conversations with. I don't know how to get better when there isn't already an ingrained mentorship program. So, especially when we are in those environments where there is that ambiguity, but still so much rules and restrictions, you need to then play into that to add additional structure to have those regulated conversations so that you're able to have it in a good, safe, and comfortable manner. And that's part of it. Do people feel comfortable or not to build? When people can't build or ask those types of questions or get meaningful answers that, yes, still give them answers without breaching confidentiality, then you lose those elements. You lose the knowledge transfer. You lose the ability to see the big picture and where things intertwine. Everything that makes other companies stronger when they are able to break down those silos gets lost. So it's
Yeah.
really, you need to have those very clear definitions.
Yeah.
And so how much structure you need, it does depend on what work you're doing. If you aren't
Yeah.
as confidential, you don't need to have as much restrictions around the conversations. But when you are in that space, you need to be able to then balance it. How could we still make people feel safe and comfortable and have them even feel empowered to talk and discuss without breaching those confidentiality clauses?
Yes, and something else in relation to all of that was we saw from our conversations we had with people a real morale decline because people found out when they did something wrong, but they never found out when they did something right because the information wasn't passed back to them. Why? Well, because I had to go through a lot of channels, it's secret, it's classified. We don't even know if it's successful. It goes through so many layers, we don't know exactly what they're even using it for. So it did present something really interesting. And I think you're so correct where when you're in an environment like that, it could be pharmaceutical, it could be weapons, anything that has a lot of protections and regulations. It's really important to have those conversations where, again, just like you said, even though we can't talk about specifics, we're going to talk about what we can talk about and not just let the atrophy set in of don't worry about it.
Yeah. Oh, I can't even have this conversation. And that's a great point that you also brought up. Feedback. That's something that we talk about so much when we do talk about performance systems. When you do want improvement and you want that good, strong, healthy culture, absolutely. I need to be able to know, what am I doing successfully and what is it that needs to be improved upon? Without those conversations, how do you expect me to improve? Anyone to improve and get better, or if they need to tweak something. If a project was successful or not, how can we still celebrate success without having all those more confidential conversations? So it's knowing and clearly understanding, what can we talk about? Because maybe we can't talk about the specifics, but we can still talk about ideas.
Right.
And it's understanding, where is that boundary? And maybe that boundary shifts, and that's something that also needs to be understood. But it's understanding, what can I talk about? What can't I talk about? So you can have those conversations in a meaningful way. So yeah, feedback loops. I need to be able to know that if I adjusted something in my process, that it actually had a good, positive improvement down the line. And the tough thing about certain processes is that you might not see that impact until months later. And that's another struggle. It's a delayed feedback. Part of that's the nature of the beast. But you have to be able to still be able to take it back in. Take in that feedback. This worked well, and let's now think, how can we apply this newfound knowledge to everything else that we're working on?
Yeah.
Should we apply it? What can we do? And so we need to now start thinking beyond that feedback. If this is what I'm being told, what can I do now?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we were brought in there. We spent 6 weeks there, and actually a little bit more than that, but essentially 6 full weeks there. We had access. They did background checks. We could walk around and check things out. And towards the end, we found out there was a whole other clean room that we didn't even have access to. That was doing things that they did not even talk about. So the multiple levels there of secrecy were, I would say, the ultimate environment where communication is key. Mm-hmm. I mean, really, just anything that you can talk about, don't fall into that. Don't fall into that compartmentalization. People are afraid to talk about things. People hold secrets their whole careers, their whole lives, and the secrets go away with them. So to take a shift away from just the secret environment of that place, I would like to talk about how they relied on data that may not have been really quite as accurate as they thought it would be. So what was your experience with that?
Yeah, so that was an interesting thing that we stumbled upon, because they were working on implementing new tools to digitalize, which is fantastic. There are lots of benefits to digitizing. You're able to potentially see things at a much faster rate, see patterns that you could not if you're just manually going through things. But the issue is when you also don't give full tools, so it's just like a partial tools, not full accessibility. So you end up with some data that people feel so rushed that it's just all just manual, and you might miss decimal point here and there. Or when you do those data pulls, it's not being pulled and cleaned correctly. And when you're not cleaning data, and this happens to every company, not just this one, every industry.
Yep.
When you do look at data, you need to make sure you're looking at the right data and that it is also cleaned effectively.
Yep.
Without that, it turns into just a lot of noise.
Yeah.
So something that we need to do, and as we'll be pulling out data, we'll just see a lot of that noise. And so it's how to then filter it out, what is noise, what is not. Because then if you're now trying to make data-driven decisions, which is, once again, it's a good thing. We should be looking at data and having information to inform us. But
Yeah.
if the information that we're looking at is not good, then deemed to be questionable, then what is good data? What are we collecting that's valuable? Yeah.
And something that you said a lot during that project that I thought was really just a good phrase to say was sources of truth.
Mm-hmm.
You said they had multiple sources of truth. So where is this housed? Well, it's housed here. It's written down. It's written down in notes. It's entered into the machines. It's pulled out of the machines. It's also entered into the software, and it's entered into another software. So what is the source of truth? And we spent hours and hours trying to harvest some data that we would be allowed to look at just to make analysis on some of their processes. And what we ended up running into was we could not trust the data enough to truly make good recommendations on specific things.
Absolutely. And every time that we would then show some data, even that data was then brought into question.
Right.
So it's okay. If all of the data is not something that can be trusted, where do you go from there? Do we need to just have a hard stop, clear out the past, and move forward? Which is essentially the same as just taking a whole bunch of pieces of paper and putting them in the trash, unfortunately. Or like, how can we then say this is the new point where it's new tracking? We have our lessons learned. How can we branch from here? Where do you define, or even if you keep in the system, okay, how do you clearly separate it so you are able to now start properly tracking and trending?
Right.
Because that's also an issue, because when they were working towards that digital transformation, and it is slow, it happens in phases, absolutely, as people get used to it, get more comfortable with it, but it is that intermittent time that needs to also have a clear plan. Otherwise, it does become more chaotic because there are those different sources of truth.
Yeah.
I'm writing things down here on paper, then we still need to update the systems, but the updating the system takes too much time. So let's just go off of the paper and we'll have the systems catch up later. So when it comes to digital transformation, so much of it is planning. What is the vision? What are the expectations? It's not just to collect data.
Right.
It is, what is the purpose of this? How does this tool fit in to be a benefit, as opposed to just, it looks nice and we should do it because everyone else is doing it? It is, where does it fit into that culture change? Where does it fit into making people's lives easier and having that plan? And then as part of that transformation, you need to have a plan for the intermittent stages as well. You need to be okay with a slowdown and
Yeah.
understand what are those milestones to say, okay, this is the expected slowdown, and this is when I expect it to come back up, and this is what my future state's going to be like. And you have to be okay with time for transformation.
Do
If
you
you
think
are
there's,
still rushing, you're not going to be able to get there. Yeah.
yeah. Do you think so? For a very long time, very successfully, everything they did was written by hand.
Yeah.
And then there was, I think, a pressure that we all feel to digitize everything.
Mm-hmm.
And, then you get a mix and it starts to get confusing and sloppy. And again, this is a successful operation that these people are running. But I really wanted to talk about them in particular because they are the tip of the spear. They are working on things that have never been done before in the history of the world, never been created. The things they work on are beyond state of the art by years, and they are still running into these problems that we would assume someone like that would have everything digitized, automatic. So if they're having problems, all of the rest of us are going to be having problems in every industry, every line of work.
I think what it is, it's so one of the things that they were dealing with was they were going through a little bit of a transition and a growth period. Now, some industries, it's a very clear, this is the purpose of this facility, and we're going to now design everything around that. And that's what they did have. What was changing was they're starting to adopt going from small scale to larger scale. Now it's all relative, but for them it was a larger scale, moving more product faster through this process. You're able to do that when you have the scale for it. When everything is designed for small, you're once again now gonna go through those growth pains.
Right.
And that's normal for everyone. Even any company that goes from when it's tiny, things are happening. I'm able to just walk to someone's door and say, let's do this. And they're like, okay, cool. I could drop everything and do work on this with you and make it happen. Then take that same company, fast forward 5, 10, 20 years, and they've now quadrupled, grew 10 times their size. Who knows? But that's when you now start putting on structures. Now it's a balance between structure and that flexibility. And it's understanding what are your needs, because to grow, you need structure. And you need to build with tools to fit that structure. But you also don't want to overstructure a system where you're so blocked by red tape that you cannot get the work done that you need. So you need to understand, where are you in that growth scale? And when things aren't working, that's okay. Maybe we need to scale something back a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's why with any transformation, you need to have a plan for what do those middle steps look like. And you have to be okay with sometimes things are going to be uncomfortable. Your goals need to be able to reflect that adjustment time, and your vision needs to be able to reflect those adjustments. If you go from having a company and then you are Xing the population, 20Xing however much you are, you're going to need to be okay with things are not going to be that same swift quickness.
Right.
People are not going to be at that level because they weren't also at the foundation. But you still need them to be able to catch up much faster. How do you do that? So you need to have that vision and that plan for growth, balancing that structure. You cannot just throw a structure onto an already made system and say, go.
Right.
That's how you end up with people hitting roadblocks and frustration points. And people kind of just now have to start working outside the system to get things done.
How often do we see that a company buys a new software, an ERP system or MRP system, whatever it is, to manage their operation, a part of it or all of it, and within 6 months, they end up using spreadsheets again?
If they don't
all the
actually
time.
complete full.
Yeah, if they don't just close because they've messed themselves up so badly.
Yeah. And so there's a need for structure, but you cannot overstructure to the point where you cannot function.
Right. So you got to find that sweet spot.
Yeah. Or make sure, really, when you are adding a new tool, don't just add it because it's what's on the market.
Right.
Sometimes it's okay to deal with the status quo
Right.
and build something that works best for you, knowing that's going to take more time, knowing it's going to take a lot more investment, but it's doing what was best for your needs as opposed to just what's available. And that's a very unique type of idea when especially we are in this world of, I want it now.
Yeah.
I need to have this so we could solve these other problems. And I get that. But you don't just want to overburden a system with additional tools, because that's when we end up hitting additional roadblocks.
Yeah. I think more than ever, people really need help with making decisions in a good structured way with a good decision analysis. You and I alone have each worked with enough companies where we have seen if they would have slowed down and spent 5 hours or just one day thinking about a major purchase like an ERP system, it would have completely changed the trajectory of where they're at. A lot of times we get called into places because companies have got themselves in such a pickle because they made decisions too quickly based on pressure and have been afraid of the status quo.
Yeah.
Which is always an option.
Yeah, and the tough thing is also being able to say that you are wrong and going down the wrong path.
Yeah.
Especially when you are invested. Whether it's time, it's money, it's resources.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why those milestones are so important. So you're able to say, are we actually making that progress that we need? And sometimes, yes, you do need some more time, but are we at least seeing that we are taking those steps and that we could sustain, well, not just what we've already done, we can sustain it for the future, or do we need to pivot?
Right.
And we need to be okay with letting go every once in a while and saying, this is the point where we need to pivot. What we're doing is not sustainable.
Yeah.
No matter how much more time, how much more resource we keep on throwing at this, it's just going to become more and more complicated in an unsustainable way. Or how can we pivot to make it more sustainable? Or, guys, we need to take a break and actually truly reevaluate, are we doing the right thing given what we know now?
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing that I saw with a client, I think I talked to you about it before. They were having a real heck of a problem with all the different communication channels, text, Teams messages, and email, and phone calls. And so they were looking for a magic pill to fix all of this, and they got Slack. And Slack is really cool and it's really useful for certain things, and it was not really useful for them. So what they ended up doing was adding a fifth, exponentially more complex system of communication that really, last time I talked to them, they were to the point they were ready to just get rid of it. Yeah. So it's about really sitting down, getting to the root cause of why we're having these problems with communications. Well, we have a lot of different methods, and not putting any standards or structures in that will make sense. Instead, they're looking for the Band-Aid, which we all do, and the Band-Aid was Slack, and it just covered up the infection and made it worse.
And sometimes it's not that we need to add more. Sometimes less is more. And we need to reevaluate how we're using our current tools and if we could actually use it better. Yeah. And capitalize on what we already have. So we're able to simplify so you have less noise. Because what happens when you do have pinging from one source and another source and another source and another source, you are constantly context switching. Of course, I cannot keep on top of my communications when I have 3 to 10 different sources of communications.
Right.
And you know what? Something will fall off the table because I cannot look at everything and be responding to everything all the time. Sometimes having a singular location and then it's able to prioritize within that what is needed, that could be sometimes more powerful. Yeah. As opposed to having all these other tools. Now, of course, it's still not perfect, and you might still need to have like another way to be like, hey, this is actually really important. I need you to pay attention to this.
Right.
And versus if you have still all those different tools where you're still constantly looking here and there, you're looking at 3 different channels, it's very different from here's a main one where things are being prioritized effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, Maytal, we could talk all day, but I'm going to ask a couple questions. First of all, what is next for you? What's going on?
Ooh, what's coming up? Well, definitely we have a couple of additional projects coming through the pipeline. Another thing that we're focusing on is constantly how are we able to develop other people to be better not just as problem solvers, but also as leaders. How do you do that? When people don't have time to stop what they're doing to get better. And that's also interesting, how dichotomy, right? How are you able to improve when I don't have time to learn how to improve?
Right.
It's going back. What is that long-term vision? And am I okay with the transition period?
Yeah.
Not everyone is. And when I'm not okay with the transition period, if I'm not okay with, because when it comes to learning anything, there's always the period where it's rougher.
Yeah.
There's always that transition. If you're not okay with dealing with that discomfort, getting outside of your comfort zone and being okay with the fact that things are going to look different, how do you expect to get to that next level?
Yeah. What KT can do is come in and help you plug the hole. Then you can bail out the water later. But, there's a lot of psychology that goes on there. So, Maytal, thank you very much for being on the episode. So, it's great talking with you. I'd like to have you on again soon.
And keep doing great stuff, Joe.
All right. See you later.
All right.
Okay.
See you. Bye.
Bye.